Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for this speech. My name is Anya and this is Alicia.
Hello.
We will be telling about scaling done in a slightly unconventional way. So we are going to tell you the story of how we scaled elements. And before I do, I have to apologize to you because apparently there has been some informal agreement that all of the speakers are wearing black and I was not reading the right channel. So. I'm not going to bore you with our life stories, but I can tell you what are we going to talk about today. So we will give a brief introduction. Of course, we will state some goals for this speech and for this meeting. And we will, of course, tell you a story of elements. And yeah, that's our journey. We will give a short summary, but we really hope for some interesting questions at the end of the speech we have allocated. Yes, I know we can count on you guys on the backseats. So we hope for some discussion or for some interesting or maybe more controversial topics. And the goals for today. So, of course, we are going to talk not only about some opportunities that we took, but also a lot of challenges and things that went wrong on the way. I hope this will be interesting. We will show you the path that we followed. And just a small remark, it's been 3 years since we started, so it's a long journey. And of course, we won't be able to tell you about everything that happened in the meantime. But we will try to pick the most juicy snippets from this novel and present them to you. Hope you like them. And our main point, I think, is to actually try to convince you guys that it is possible and it can be valuable to actually grow your own organic scaled project without really adapting any ready-made frameworks or some detailed descriptions of how you should do things. So we grew our own, and that's what we are going to talk about.
Okay, you can thinking what KMD Elements is. KMD Elements is a cloud solution to handle with complex data validation and advanced formula-based settlements on time series for companies operating in energy market. And when we started, we were only 3 teams set up, and now we have more than 100 people in our product. So you can imagine what kind of journey we had. The first chapter, because we have a chapter, it's about the lack of trust. When I joined to KMD Elements in 2019, as I said, we had only 3 teams, and the third one was really new because it was created 3 months earlier. And we have also 3 persons in a product owner's role. And these product owners were acting as a PO's body. So they were present on every meetings, every Scrum events in all 3 teams. And they were not invited into the daily meetings because the teams didn't want to invite them. And my first observation was that we have a huge lack of trust on both sides, in business and in development. The sign of this lack of trust was that sometimes POs were asking me if someone is at work because the name of this person wasn't be assigned to any specific task on the board. So it was an assumption that this person is absent this day. What we did, we started from the make all these things transparent. We made all these things transparent because it's the first step to change something. You need to start talking about these things which you want to change. And we started talk about the lack of trust. We started talking about the splitting POs between the teams, but at this moment in our history, they weren't be able to. They didn't want to split it between the teams. They tried to acting with all teams as a PO's body, as I mentioned. We had a common meeting called Nexus, and it wasn't connected with the Nexus framework. It was a meeting which was a creme de la creme of our daily meetings. It was like status dedicated to POs. And we didn't talk on this meeting about our challenges, about our issues. We were not transparent in our communication. And the first step to change this situation was to start talking about it, and we did it. The POs were ready to split it between the teams with creation of 4 teams, because it was impossible for them on the physical level to be a part, take a part in every meeting in this bigger setup. So it was a crucial moment in our history when we started to have a dedicated PO to the Scrum team, because we started to create some relation with them. We started to talk about our issues. It was a crucial moment for our setup. And what next? We started to try convince our teams to invite POs to the daily meetings. I know that they are not required, but it was a sign of the next level of trust to invite them, and we convinced our teams for some little experiment for 2 months. And the result of this experiment was that they are needed on these meetings, and they had a moment when they had a chance to collect all this information that they needed, and they stopped to try control our setup, because they finally started to feel that they are a part of our Scrum teams. So the level of our trust from this moment was starting to increasing. You can see on this slide what kind of synchronization point we had at this moment. And further you will have a possibility to see how it changed during the time. What is important, this situation was before pandemic. We started to work together in physical on-site world.
Okay, so I'm going to take over from here, and here's our next chapter. So this is exactly where COVID hit. You're going to love it. Because what happened is that suddenly, instead of 3 teams, we were 6 teams, 3 Scrum Masters, and a situation in which we cannot actually be physically present in the office. So if we had any communication issues before, this is exactly when they all became very visible and very painful, to be honest. So we really had to learn our lessons fast in order to establish certain alignment and communication channels, and this was also our focus. So the trust thing started before, of course, but in such a situation in which you have to recruit people remotely, you have to work with people remotely, suddenly, you have to really bet everything on building trust and an environment full of trust. So how we approached that? We focused on fostering open discussions on different occasions, different fields, different meetings, because obviously it was difficult to speak to others in so-called meantime, because there was no meantime, there were no kitchen meetings, there were no desks standing together, and we were not used to it. And to be honest, we were not really so well prepared to start on this journey. I don't know if anyone was, actually, but we had to do what we could. And yeah, it became a real challenge to actually synchronize on a daily basis, because while we were still present at the office, teams would often come and visit each other plannings and other meetings, and they could immediately exchange information whenever there was something unclear or they needed to discuss some dependency and so on. But here, well, there are no other meetings, so we have to sync somehow. So how this thing changed? First of all, we had to invest in a completely different tool to do some workshops and visualize stuff. So we decided to experiment with Mural, and this was also the very first time that we were using a virtual whiteboard to facilitate our meetings. I will show you the magnificent results in a moment. And what is also important, the Nexus meeting, which was, as Alicia said previously, a place to actually give a status of your sprint to the product owners, became a space for sharing information with other developers on what's actually going on in the sprints, so that everybody was on the same page. And well, the review, what's interesting, and where the title of this great, I will remind you of the title for a second. Nothing to present. Where does nothing to present come from? It actually comes from our review, because well, being so enthusiastic about having a great remote review on Teams, we thought it's a great idea to actually have all the teams present, or at least say something on this meeting, regardless of the fact if they actually have something to present or to demo. So some of our reviews at that time actually consisted of a number of people stepping up on Teams, switching their camera on and saying, "Hi, it's team XYZ, nothing to present, thank you." So we tried to learn on it because, well, this is a lesson, and you just gotta take it for what it is and try to act on it. So in the future, as you will see on the next slides, we actually managed to get out of this trap and improve and adjust our process to our needs. But the important lesson here is, I think that on the journey to a bigger scale of organization, you will encounter a lot of traps, and you will encounter a lot of funny or silly or sometimes embarrassing situations, and it is the nature of the process of discovery. So there's nothing wrong with it, and you just have to remember to learn, not only feel embarrassed. And yeah, there was also one new meeting that we introduced, was the alignment, because guess what? When you are working in a setup that is basically in two different countries, in Denmark and in Poland in our case, it is really not so easy to let people casually chat over the emerging issues or some current topics. So we really had to create a separate meeting for that, for us to be able to talk to the management out there and to communicate about some current progress, some important topics, try to get some decisions done or not, depends on the case. But yeah, we were trying. So this was yet another experiment. And if you were wondering about our first magnificent uses of Mural, there was also a lesson here. If you want people to start using a completely new tool out of a sudden, give them some instructions first. Because what we ended up with were some random boards with a completely uncomparable schemes of what people put there. Of course, each of these pictures that you see here is a plan for upcoming few sprints, and there are features, of course, there are teams, but putting all of that together in a single plan, believe me, that was a big problem. But we also learned our lesson. And here's another exciting chapter of our story and no dependencies. I wonder if you can guess where this came from. Of course, we stepped in another hole, so to say, and we decided, okay, since we are a big remote setup, let's focus on how we are dependent on each other. Because when the complexity of the setup is growing, it really makes sense to think a little bit before about how a team or a feature depend on each other. So in order to do that, we had people discuss it on Nexus meetings. Guess what? We also wanted everybody to speak up. And what happened? Actually, on the timeline, and that was somewhere around autumn 2020, there was the 7th team and the 4th Scrum Master. And this was the very exciting moment when we decided that 7 teams is a little bit too much for one head of development to handle, and that it makes more sense to actually have Marcin Moskwa, who's with us, and his counterpart in the Michał's person. So we wanted to make sure that all of the people in our setup have access and have the possibility to actually have relation with their manager and to talk to him or her and to exchange some observations. And also fantastic new role appeared here, that's the terminators. And probably those of you who have never heard of Elements are wondering what this might be. It has nothing to do with the famous movie, but we just nicknamed the role so that it sounded more funny than serious and maybe was a little bit more acceptable for the audience. So the terminators were actually representatives of the teams who were in each sprint responsible, first of all, for attending this common Nexus meeting, but also for handling different kinds of cross-team issues or maybe some defects or some production environment problems and so on. So we were big enough to actually need a separate role for that because otherwise nobody felt accountable. And speaking of our agile journey, that's also the time when we focus on learning and learning our lessons well. Because when you are growing, really, you cannot afford to make the same mistakes over and over again. So you've got to learn and you've got to improve. And we were experimenting a lot with that. And one of the successful experiments here was introducing the post-mortem meetings. So whenever something went really wrong in the project, we would have all the people involved meet up and discuss, like, okay, guys, what happened? What's the timeline? Is there anything we have to fix? And how do we make our process more bulletproof in the future? And also the different kinds of feedback loops were very important for us. And speaking of the feedback loops, I don't know if you heard, probably not, but Elements, even though it is such a big project, it actually doesn't have a very direct contact with the customers on our review meetings. So we don't have customer reps, we don't have customers themselves on the review meetings. We have some intermediaries that can then speak to our customers. But this was the first time in the history of Elements that on the review, whenever some team was presenting the outcomes of their work, we were asking a question, okay, so how is that relevant to our customer? How does that impact our clients? Is it important? What are the customers going to do with that functionality? You may think it is obvious, you may think it is stupid, but if you are working in a very technical and modern IT environment, and you don't have your customer present all the time, it is really easy to actually forget that they are there somewhere and that you are building something, not to build like a technically perfect solution, but you are building something that somebody will use in the end. So this is how we were trying to change our focus. But speaking of changes, unfortunately, things were often changing for us very last minute because we didn't have direct contact with our customers. But we improved one thing. So this is a screenshot of our mural for the big planning for teams with a completely new template. And again, you may say, okay, it's a template. That's some silly stuff that we are selling here. But ordering or structuring work on such a big meetings when a lot of people are participating and they are tasked with like similar things to do, it's really better to have a structure. And it's really easier for people not to struggle with, oh, how do I do this? Should we put it in lines, or maybe should we put it in columns, or maybe we should do a mind map or whatever. If you provide a structure, it's easier to follow. And just to prove that it's not just a silly idea, we got some feedback after this first time that this template was introduced. And as you can see, like, people kind of liked it. I hope they still do. But yeah, we were trying to improve not for ourselves, but for the people and for those who are actually using the solutions.
Okay, the next chapter is dedicated to respect to others. In last year, we signed the next contract with new customer. And guess what? We identified the need to grow up. We decided to hire more people because we are not big enough. And the situation on the market was convinced our managers to hire whole teams, whole outsourced teams, because the speed of recruitment process was too low. And we needed these people right now. And with this decision, we should face the next level of complexity in our setup and new challenge to integrate people from other company in our setup, with our setup. We had a lot of challenges, and this was the next one, the new one. And a big part of focus our Scrum Masters at this moment was dedicated to integrate these developers, the new teams, and organize their work and way which can handle with the differences in our style of work and our culture of the companies and our vision how the collaboration should look like. It's a long story about involving people in our activities, sharing the knowledge, about building the culture of being thankful, appreciating someone's help. And we started to have the part of review meeting dedicated to say thank you to other people. We started to have new meeting with our managers to have shorter feedback loop. We started to make the synchronization on every single level as simple as it possible. And we started to use the kudos for this appreciating, and you can see on the slide how many kudos after one sprint, 2 weeks of work in our product we got. It's almost 30. You don't have to calculate. And our product was at this moment so big that we tried to understand all the details. And we started to have some sessions of event stormings because it was too hard for one person to understand all the things around this product. The size was too big.
Okay, so the bubbles, this is actually the last chapter of the book that we wanted to present to you today. And well, it's not about champagne and it's not about toasting for success, but it is about how we struggled, and we struggled for a very long time to actually divide a product that was so big, that was like slightly unsustainable on its own, to divide it into domains, sub-products, product areas, you name it. And the first idea that we developed at the very beginning with the management and with the architects and with other people who were like close to the topic is to create some product areas that would encompass like just a few teams and a few business topics that were related to each other. But of course, we did it wrong, and this idea slowly died over the upcoming months because what we tried to do is to divide a product based on its architecture and not really on the business sense of it or the business functionality or even the personas or the customers or however. We focused almost solely on the technical layer of it. And well, the lesson that we learned here, and I guess it's very important, is that if you are developing a product, and it is very small at the beginning, you should, of course, think that, well, success isn't guaranteed and maybe this product will fail. And then I don't have to plan for the future, but you should also plan for the success. And you have to think about, okay, how this product is going to develop, how is it going to grow? And you should actually think about domains, about some possible split at the beginning. And you should, I guess, at least business-wise, try to construct it in a way that some boundaries are already there when it is small. Because when it is like a huge, complex business, technical spaghetti, it's really difficult to separate a few single noodles and put them in a separate box.
What we did, we started to switching our architecture from monolith to the microservices, and this change was supporting for our tries to make the work of our teams more independent in this big product. And we started to work in some work groups dedicated to specific topics because it's easier to collect a smaller amount of people on one meeting. We started to have meetings with dedicated to create a roadmap on the teams level, which was a change because in the past we had this big planning meeting for all our teams, and we didn't want to have this meeting longer, so we changed this focus to the teams more local, make it more locally, and we started to build the roadmaps in our teams. What else? We started to create these bubbles, but from the other perspective, from the perspective of process for our customers, not from the architectural level.
Yeah. And what is really interesting here that we learned that in such a big setup, it's a little bit like becoming a professional sports person. So, of course, it's fun to actually train and do exercise for fun. And then it doesn't really matter so much if you have a little bit of extra fat here and there, or maybe you are not so stretched in some places. But once you become a professional, you really want to get rid of everything that is unnecessary and everything that will basically hamper your progress towards, winning the gold medal and being absolutely the best. So what we had to do here is actually start removing everything that didn't bring enough value for us to consider it effective or possible to stay. So we removed some of the meetings, and the milestone planning was actually the first thing to disappear. So we focused, as Alicja said, on creating roadmaps that they are maintained offline mainly, but each of team has their own sequence of features dedicated for them, and we'll sometimes do workshops around that, but there are no official huge meetings for it. We resigned from any kind of checkup or alignment meetings with management, but we do have and we still maintain a Teams channel with our product owners and with management. So whenever there is some urgent matter, we can just post it there and people read it. And then if there is need for some meeting or some call, we just organize it. And even more importantly, we realized that if there are 11 teams, as you saw, it's absolutely impossible to schedule a meeting in the calendar that would require more than 10 or 15 participants in there, because the calendars overlap and it is impossible. And also it is very inconvenient and uncomfortable for people in both the business and technical roles to actually have meetings scattered all over their calendars and giving them really short periods of uninterrupted technical work. So what we did, we actually rearranged our calendars in a sense that certain business activities or business meetings or team meetings can only happen on certain time slots on certain weekdays. So in this sense, for example, Wednesdays became the no meetings day for most of the teams. Some Fridays are also no meetings day. But what we focus is okay, we are having the meetings. Let's have them either in the morning, just after dailies, or let's have them at the end of the day so that there is more space for creative and technical work in the meantime. And it really works. So apart from removing some of the unnecessary things, we also decided to make what we have as lean as possible. We are still working on it. It's not like it's the end of the journey and we've done everything we could, because every day basically brings up new challenges for us, and we notice new pieces of waste or opportunities for improvement. But the idea is that we are trying to address actual problems, not really trying to fit our setup into some framework that we decided from the beginning, oh, this is great, we're gonna try it. But we are building our own solutions, and we are building solutions to existing problems, not some imaginary ones.
So we are not masters in scaling, but we know something about this topic. If you have questions related to the metrics, because we missed this topic, we are open to answer your questions.
Yeah, because one more thing, and I really forgot about to say about it in this area, is that we focus also on making our decisions data-driven. So we are observing a number of metrics, and these metrics are evolving over time. So when we started, we were mainly observing like the sprint contents and velocity, all the basic stuff that you probably heard about. But right now, we are sometimes even comparing some estimations with, I don't know, actual effort or like different kinds of things, or maybe the time that we on average or mainly need to close a bug or to close a user story. So we are looking for different kinds of useful pieces of information.
Time's up, so thank you.
Thanks a lot.